Hey US History, hope you guys are doing well. Good job to most of you on yesterday's assignment. As a reminder, those are going to close at noon every day, so make sure that you're getting them done on time. But yeah, if you have any questions about how to work JunoPod or anything, please don't hesitate to contact me, okay? So, today we are going to talk about political reform and reaction. So, yesterday we talked about a lot of the changing things in general American society. And today we're going to talk about everything that's going on with the big guys in the White House and in Congress during this time. So, buckle in because it is an awful lot of craziness that's happening. So, first of all, we talked about the spoils system a while ago. Remember the spoils system, where if your buddy gets elected, then they're going to give you a really good job, or they're going to give you a more exalted position or something like that in the government because they're your buddy. And so let's say that Nico wins the presidential election, and he says, you know what? I'm going to let my buddy Nick be the Secretary of State. And Nick might maybe not be the best qualified to be the Secretary of State. But Nico says, well, I'm going to let my buddy Nick be Secretary of State because he's my buddy. And Nick's like, that's great because that comes with a pay raise. But Nick actually maybe isn't the best Secretary of State option, and so then some things get screwed up. So, sorry, Nick, I'm sure you'd be a great Secretary of State if you really wanted to be. Now, with that said, a lot of politicians took issue with the spoils system because, again, it's people rewarding their friends instead of rewarding the people who actually deserve the position. And so you do have a lot of reforms of people trying to do this. So, for example, Rutherford B. Hayes, he was nominated largely because he was a reformer. And so people were really wanting that reform. And in addition to all of this, the nation's really dealing with 4 specific political issues. Okay? So, 4 specific political issues are going to be the basis of everything that we're about to talk about. Okay? So, 4 issues. So, issue number 1 is government corruption. You may remember some of that from Ulysses S. Grant's administration. Issue number 2 is civil service reform. Okay, so issue number 2, civil service reform. People are trying to create a system where civil service is based on merit, is based on jobs that you are qualified to do, as opposed to jobs that you pay money to do or your buddy says you can do. And so that's part of that reform system. Issue number 3 is tariff revision. We've been talking about tariffs an awful lot this year, and they are still a problem. Those taxes on imports are still a huge problem. And then issue number 4 is regulation of the trusts. We learned about trusts yesterday. And they're starting to already get out of control. People are owning too much money and having too much control over things, okay? So these are your 4 major political issues that we are going to talk about: government corruption, civil service reform, tariff revision, and regulation of trusts. So with that said, let's get back to Rutherford B. Hayes' administration. So Hayes was nominated because he was a reformer. He was attacking these political machines that tried to control votes. He fought against Tammany Hall, who was controlled by a guy named Senator Roscoe Conkling. So this is called a political machine, okay? So a political machine is not an actual physical machine. It's a system meant to control votes. So this keeps people in power who have the money to be able to afford it, but it keeps people out of power, or keeps marginalized groups from voting. So a political machine might be anything that keeps people voting one way, anything that has voters with accountability for their votes, things like that. And so Hayes is hoping to stop these corrupt practices and actually removes a guy from authority. Spoiler alert, the guy he removes later becomes president. But he removes a guy from authority, which makes people very mad. And so it splits the Republican Party into 2 factions: your radical Republicans and your moderate Republicans. And because all good things need a nickname, both of these are nicknamed. Okay, so you've got your split So your radicals are called the stalwarts. Stalwart usually meaning something like somebody that stays with their position, stays with the old thing. The stalwarts favor high tariffs, hard money, and the spoils system. So they're big on tariffs, they're big on rewarding their buddies, they're big on continuing on the way things were, usually pretty corrupt. But not necessarily all corrupt, just so you know. But a lot of the more corrupt people did favor a stalwart point of view. Then your others is your moderates. Note these are both Republicans, so split in Republicans. Your moderates are called half-breeds. Now this is not very, very complimentary. It sounds like something you'd call somebody you didn't really like. And half-breeds were moderates who were dissatisfied with the radical Republicans, who were angry at Grant for his corrupt administration, who wanted things to change. So now in 1880, in the presidential election, the Republicans are stuck. Do we nominate a stalwart or do we nominate a half-breed? Who can we nominate in order to get votes, in order to get elected? Because they cared about beating the Democrats, obviously. And so they end up with compromising, and they nominate a half-breed for president, but a stalwart for vice president. Okay? So in your election of 1880, you have your Republican is president. They nominate Garfield, not the cat, who is a half-breed. And for vice president, they nominate Arthur, who is actually the guy that got kicked out of the political machine earlier, and he is a stalwart. And it works. They end up winning. They actually face Winfield Scott Hancock, who you may remember as the guy who came up with the Anaconda Plan. But despite Winfield Scott came up with the Anaconda Plan. Winfield Scott Hancock was a general at Gettysburg who gained a lot of fame. But despite his fame, Winfield Scott Hancock was not able to win, and actually Garfield didn't win the election, which meant that things were looking up for a little while. James Garfield was a man of good character, and he was a man of great ability, and he began to attempt reforms immediately after entering office. However, just 2 months after his inauguration, an office seeker named Guiteau shot Garfield at a railroad station, saying, "I am a stalwart, and I want Arthur to be president." Unfortunately, Garfield passed away after 11 weeks of pain and inefficient medical care. Okay, so Garfield was assassinated in 1881, and Arthur is now president. Now, people thought that Arthur, as a stalwart, was going to favor all of these high tariffs, spoil system, and even some of the corruption, but he actually was a nice surprise. He didn't do any of that. He also tried to revise the tariff, and so he actually passed what was called the Mongrel Tariff in 1883. Now, the thing is, it didn't really work, because the Mongrel Tariff wasn't actually a new tariff. It was only a clarification of party stances on the tariff. And so the tariff wasn't actually a new tariff, so he wasn't really passing tariff reform, he was just trying to. As a result, his prospects were not looking very good in the election of 1884. And he was not nominated as the Republican nominee for president. They nominated instead a guy named James G. Blaine. Now, here was the issue. So your Republican candidate was Blaine. Your Democratic candidate was a guy named Grover Cleveland. So you have Blaine versus Grover Cleveland. Now, here's the issue with the two candidates. James Blaine was an excellent person morally, but his political history was riddled with corruption and scandals left and right and everywhere. Grover Cleveland, however, was a very good politician with a very clean history. However, he did have a couple of personal scandals, but as a politician, he had a very, very good record of cleanliness, of fighting against corruption. And so actually, even a lot of Republicans ended up voting for Cleveland, and they were called mugwumps because they basically said that they were straddling the fence. The Mugwumps, however, took the name as a badge of honor and said, "We are the Mugwumps and we support Cleveland." And so Cleveland ended up winning. Actually, Blaine almost won. Cleveland won by like 1,000 votes, and that's it, out of millions. 1,000 votes out of millions. So Cleveland was actually the first Democratic victory in 28 years. They hadn't had a Democratic candidate in 28 years, because if you remember, a lot of the Democrats were part of the Confederacy, and so they weren't able to be elected afterwards. So now, Cleveland is attempting to regulate commerce and the trusts. And so he actually passes the Interstate Commerce Act in 1887. So Cleveland wins, and then you have your ICC, Interstate Commerce Act, ICA. Okay, so in the Interstate Commerce Act, which is in 1887, Cleveland does three things. Okay, number one, he directs that all railroad rates must be reasonable and just. Number two, he requires that all railroad companies publish all rates and make financial reports so that they can't do anything scandalous. And number three, he provides for the creation of something called the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission. This is a regulatory agency outside of the railroads that is responsible for policing them. The railroads were not asked to police themselves because they weren't trusted. You have a lot of shady activities, rate fixing, discriminatory rates. So basically charging women more, charging people of color more money to ride the railroad. And so Cleveland was trying to fight against all of that with his Interstate Commerce Act. If you had to write down your rates, you couldn't just charge people more because you felt like it. And so that was trying to stop abuses. And it won him a lot of popularity. However, when we get to the election of 1888, the Republicans changed their tactics. Again, the Democrat Cleveland is running, but he is now running against Benjamin Harrison. And Harrison has a reputation of being very honest. He's also the grandson of William Henry Harrison, who has been president before. Now, Harrison was very honest, very stand-up guy. However, he wasn't really strong on any tariffs. He wasn't really strong on any issues at all, really. He was very honest, he was very capable, but he wasn't really fighting for anything. And he won, sort of. So Grover Cleveland won the popular vote. More actual American citizens voted for Grover Cleveland. But because of the way the Electoral College is set up, which is set up for a couple of very valid reasons that we've discussed before, Benjamin Harrison ended up winning. Whether or not you think that's okay, I'll let you think about that and actually tell me a little bit about it in the Junipod later. But Benjamin Harrison ended up winning, although he was a disappointingly weak president. He actually oversaw the first $1 billion Congress, which is Congress that actually had a budget over $1 billion. With this free spending, he actually depleted a lot of the treasury that Grover Cleveland had so carefully built up during his presidency, and actually made America's economy a lot weaker. And so, needless to say, he was not looking up for things in the election of 1892. However, he did pass something big called the Sherman Antitrust Act. And the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, and it outlawed monopolies. It made monopolies illegal. If the consumer needed the product and could get it nowhere else, like, monopolies could drive up the prices so much, like we've talked about. And so the Sherman Antitrust Act actually made monopolies illegal. It basically said that a lot of the trusts were illegal now. And so it was difficult to enforce, but it was a very good start. And it was the building block for which when later presidents would build upon it and go further to protecting consumers from monopolies. So that was one big thing from the Harrison administration that was good. However, most of the Harrison administration was characterized by too much spending, not enough bringing in income. Now, a major goal was to raise the tariff again, and they did. In 1890 as well, in addition to the Sherman Antitrust Act, they passed the McKinley Tariff. It was named for Senator McKinley, whose idea it was, and it was incredible. It was high. It charged more money on agricultural tariffs, on agricultural imports, on higher duties on manufactured goods, and it basically highlighted American inefficiency. American businesses were not able to create all this stuff, and the tariff was so high that it started to destroy the economy and destroyed the popularity of the Republican Party. So that by the time you get to the election of 1892, first of all, Senator William McKinley is voted out of office because nobody thinks that this tariff is popular at all. But second of all, in 1892, you have a rematch. Cleveland runs again. And of course, the incumbent Harrison runs. But Harrison just spent $1 billion and passed this tariff that everybody hated, and that was working on destroying the American economy. And so, needless to say, he was voted out, and Cleveland ends up winning. So Cleveland won in 1884, then lost in 1888 to Benjamin Harrison, but then beat Benjamin Harrison in 1892. However, unfortunately for Cleveland, in 1893, there was a historic collapse called the Panic of 1893. Now, was the economic depression President Cleveland's fault? No, it was not. It was the fault of Benjamin Harrison's administration. It was the fault of the McKinley tariff. It was the fault of the $1 billion Congress, which had spent $1 billion and then passed a tariff, making it almost impossible to make that money back. However, because the economic depression happened technically under Cleveland's administration, it crushed the Democratic popularity, and unfortunately, banks and businesses failed. Unemployment mounted to 20%. This was the worst depression in American history up to this point. Now, the Great Depression is worse, but up to this point in 1893, this was the worst depression that America had ever seen. And so Cleveland's popularity plummeted, the Democrats' popularity plummeted, and the Republicans saw quite possibly the only way that they could have regained popularity after the economic collapse, which was to elect a Democrat and then have all of their mistakes come crashing down and hit them. So imagine if you walk up to give a presentation and you make it through, but you destroy all the equipment in the classroom, but you technically made your presentation. But then the next person that goes behind you now has to deal with all of this messed up classroom, messed up technology, and they're the ones that now can no longer present. That's kind of what happened. The Republicans messed up the economy, but then the Democrats got elected right when it was all crashing down, and so they took the blame for it. Now, that is actually the end of today's lesson. We leave you in suspense with the economy crumbling, the Democrats' popularity plummeting. What will happen? We don't know. Again, I'll post this video. Here's all of the whiteboard so that you can make sure you get all your notes. We'll post this for you. You have your JunoPod assignment to complete after this. I miss you guys. I definitely miss having you in the classroom. It's very weird to be able to get through these lessons in less than 20 minutes, and I miss our discussion. So I hope that you're commenting along. I hope that you're following along. Feel free to send me any reactions or ask for help if you need it, okay? I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.